Welcome to The Explainer. When an ice storm hits, what's the difference between a real crisis and just an inconvenience? Well, it all comes down to resilience. Today, we're going to show you how to prep for a storm by thinking like a power grid engineer to make your home truly resilient.
So, when freezing rain starts to fall, it looks kind of magical, right? It's beautiful, but it's also deceptive. As that ice piles up, sometimes an inch thick or more, the sheer weight of it can bring an entire city to a grinding halt, encasing everything in this heavy, destructive layer.
Yeah, when a big ice storm hits, it's pretty much a given that the power is going to go out. The real question is that going to be a minor hassle for you or a full-blown crisis? It really all comes down to one simple concept: resilience. And here's the key: building it starts long before the first drop of freezing rain even falls.
Okay, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at the fragility of our systems in winter. Then, we're going to borrow a core concept from engineering to build up that resilience. And finally, we'll get practical and walk through how to harden your home, your pantry, and your overall plan.
All right, first up, let's get a really clear picture of what's actually at stake when that ice storm warning pops up for your area.
So the biggest threat really is just the raw weight of the ice. It's incredibly heavy. It snaps tree branches like twigs, and then those fall onto power lines, creating this whole cascade of failures. The utility companies will tell you need to be ready to go without electricity for at least 72 hours, but honestly, it could be a lot longer.
Okay, so how in the world do you prepare for that kind of massive system failure? Well, we can actually take a huge lesson from the very engineers who manage the power grid itself.
Right, so the goal here isn't to be like unbreakable. That's just not possible. The goal is resilience. In engineering talk, that's just a system's ability to take a hit, adapt to the stress, and then bounce back. It's about being flexible, not just strong.
What's really interesting here is this idea of a fragility curve. Take a look. That blue line shows the point where a system, say a power line, is probably going to fail as an event like a storm gets more intense. But, and this is the cool part, look what happens when you add some protective measures. See how the curve shifts over to the right? That means the system can now handle a much stronger storm before it finally breaks. Engineers have a name for this whole process. They call it hardening.
Hardening is just a fancy term for taking proactive steps to make a system stronger, so it's less likely to fail when disaster strikes. And guess what? We can apply this exact same idea to our own homes.
All right, let's get into the practical stuff. We'll start with hardening your home's most vulnerable system against the cold: your water and pipes.
Okay, here is a simple but absolutely brilliant hardening measure. It's called the tub trick. Think about it. If the power goes out, the pumps that supply your water might fail too. So by filling a tub with water beforehand, you create this amazing backup reservoir. Now this isn't for drinking, but it gives you dozens of toilet flushes. That turns a major sanitation problem into a total non-issue.
All right, the next step is to stop your pipes from freezing and bursting in the first place. Super simple stuff here. Letting your faucets drip keeps the water moving, and moving water has a much harder time freezing solid. Also, open up those cabinets under your sinks. That allows the warmer air from inside your house to circulate around the plumbing and keep things from freezing up.
And this is where it gets really creative. You do not need expensive gear for this. Just look at what residents in Houston did. You can use everyday stuff. A big styrofoam cup from a fast food joint, a pool noodle sliced open and wrapped around a pipe, even an old boot or a disposable diaper can provide that crucial layer of insulation. You're just trying to harden your outdoor pipes against that deep freeze.
All right, moving on. Let's apply that same hardening idea to our food. This is all about building a pantry that goes way beyond that last-minute panic buy for bread and milk.
The real key here is to shift your mindset. You've got to move from short-term panic buying to long-term resilience. Look at the typical shopping cart on the left. It's full of stuff that's pretty much useless if you don't have power. A hardened pantry, on the other hand, is built with shelf-stable foods that will keep you fed, no electricity, no cooking required. And listen, this does not mean you're stuck eating cold beans out of a can for 3 days straight. Not at all. With a well-hardened pantry, you can make some surprisingly great and even sophisticated meals. Think about it: a cowboy caviar bean salad with tortilla chips, or a meze platter with canned fish and olives, all made with zero power.
Okay, last big section. Let's talk about hardening your plan itself. Your most valuable resource isn't a fancy generator or a flashlight, it's information. Specifically, it's that lead time you get from a weather forecast.
This is something the academic research on power grid resilience talks about over and over again. It's not just enough to have a bunch of supplies. Real resilience comes from using that advance warning, that lead time, to actively shift your home from its normal everyday state into a hardened, prepared state.
Okay, here's a perfect example of using that lead time. Hours before the storm is supposed to hit, go turn your fridge and freezer to their coldest settings. Then, freeze big containers of water. What you're doing is creating this powerful buffer of cold, so when the power does go out, you can move these massive ice blocks into your fridge, basically turning it into a temporary icebox. That can save your food for hours, maybe even a whole day longer.
And here's another really clever trick to know if your food is still safe after the power comes back on. Before the storm, put a coin on top of a frozen cup of water in your freezer. If you have to leave and then come back, check that coin. If it is sunk to the bottom of the cup, you know for a fact that everything in there thawed out completely. That means it's no longer safe to eat, even if it's all refrozen.
So really what all the research tells us is that true resilience is about having a strategy. It's about incorporating all these little things into your planning long before there's even a storm on the horizon. It's about developing your own personal resilience strategy, and you can start that right now.
So here's the final takeaway. An ice storm does not have to be a crisis.
Not at all.
By thinking like an engineer, by understanding fragility and then systematically taking these small hardening measures for your pipes, your pantry, and your plan, you can transform what could be a disaster into a manageable and maybe even a comfortable inconvenience. The only question left is, how resilient will you be?